It's time. It's time to scale. But how do you scale internationally? And how do you scale through corporate partnerships? I'm Kimberly Larsen. I'm the founder and CEO of Timetoriot and Timetoriot. And together with Sopra Steria and Danske Bank with guests, we will be exploring these topics live in this 3-part podcast series from the epicenter. Join us and see if you are ready. Are you a startup wanting to collaborate with a corporate? Or maybe you're a corporate that's considering creating a collaboration with a startup. In this episode of Time to Scale, we will discuss stories with success, we'll discuss the loopholes related to startup collaborations, and we will get some valuable insight from both public sector and private companies' perspective. And corporate partnerships is a great prioritization at Sopra Steria in order to spur innovation, and this is why they have invited Gustav from Storebrand and Petra from Digitaliseringsdirektoratet to discuss all the do's and don'ts. Tobias, you are the head of Sopra Steria Scale. Why is this important? Why should we have corporate collaborations?
Well, why we need the corporate collaborated with startups is because the big organizations need new solutions. And those solutions are maybe not developed by the large suppliers in the world. So many other solutions that can add business value are developed in the startup ecosystems. But it could be that the large corporation doesn't know about it. And that's a mistake.
So you're saying that you might become a little bit blinded when you're in a big environment and you need influences?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do believe that the large corporations, even though they are private or public sector, they don't have the capability always to see and find those solutions that are out there. But if we can help them to find those solutions and also see how they can fit into the bigger picture at the corporates, then we have some good things that keep going.
Well, Gustav, you're the Chief Innovator Officer, leading the innovation team at Storebrand. Doesn't that mean that you do all the innovation within your own team?
It's a very good question. It's like 50% of the work. The rest of the work is focused on finding and partner up with good startups out in Norway, Sweden, rest of Scandinavia, and the rest of the world.
So you agree with the Tobias, no reinventing the wheel sort of thinking?
Both yes and no. It's kind of pros and cons. If you develop everything yourself, it's a lot more costly. But on the other hand, you can kind of keep all the revenues yourself. So it's more or less how much risk you are willing to take. And if you partner up with a startup, it goes kind of faster, lower your risk, cost you less. But on the other hand, you have to share the revenues with the startup.
Petra, you also have a lot of experience from public sector. Innovation in the public sector, how is that?
I think it's progressing very well. Today we have a lot of municipalities who's very innovative and developing really good services and products for the citizens. And I also think that from the strategic point of view, innovation is on the political agenda in a completely different way than, for example, for just 5 years ago.
Do you have an example?
Yeah, I think City of Oslo is doing a lot of very interesting stuff when it comes to digitalization with their own team, Orgo. And but we should not forget all the small municipalities around Norway. They are doing a lot of very interesting innovation and contributions.
So am I understanding you guys correctly that these collaborations are actually strategically smart? It's not just like a surplus project for those who can, right?
I do believe that open innovation is 2 words that will be higher up on the agenda the coming years. And the open innovation goes on look outside your own organization to see what kind of solutions that could fit to your organization?
I think this is really good to hear. I come from a startup and a scale-up point of view, and it's nice to hear also that, you know, the value that these corporates sees in us startups. And it might be easy to see the value for the startups, but not necessarily the other way. But what do you think it takes, what do you need to see in a startup for them to be an interesting collaboration potential for you, Tobias?
For me, it's about having a use case that is easy and visible to understand. I do believe that most, maybe not most, but many startups out there are maybe thinking about they're going to solve the whole problem for the client or the customer. But if you're looking at from a corporate side, I rather look for startups who have solutions that could fit like a piece of a puzzle into a larger picture, and see how that solution, which then is the piece of a puzzle, can fit in to the large corporation or the public sector's applications. Yeah.
So is there a level of readiness needed into this? Can I just, you know, have a piece of puzzle that I have in my mind and approach you at Storebrand and say, look what I have, and we might get a partnership?
Yeah, you are more than willing to do that. And I think we will answer you quite quickly, asking you to, as briefly as possible, describe what kind of problem you are solving for the customer and why it should be in Storebrand's interest to solve that problem together. And also, if you have an idea of how we could cooperate from a business perspective, that would be good as well.
So do you actually... do you have certain areas only that you want when you're looking for potential partners? Are they solving problems you already are aware of and want to be solved, or might they come in with a new idea that you haven't thought about? Do you have a clear strategy on that part?
It's a very good question. It's both problems or customer needs that we are focusing on, but sometimes one important source for us is as simple as reading the newspapers. So when you're reading the newspapers, you read about startups solving a different customer problem or need that you haven't thought of. And then we get in contact with that startup. So it's very often the other way around, or much more often the other way around.
Oh, so it's more often that you go out and scout than that they approach you?
Yeah, I would say so.
Oh, that's interesting. Is that your experience as well, Petra?
Well, I think we need to work much more with the startups because we have a lot of challenges, not only in the public sector, but also the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, for instance. We have a lot of missions to find good solutions to. And we have, in the public sector, of course, a lot of companies contacting us. But I would see much more of that. We have companies that are very brave, calling, knocking on the door, and be very specific when they have a solution or a proposal. And we have companies that only would like to work with us through procurement. So there are different levels of how to work with startups in the public sector. But again, I think a more proactive startup scene when it comes to working with the public sector is very welcome.
So there's one thing that I'm wondering. So as a startup, I'm often experiencing that people would like to buy pilots or buy a piece of my product, but they don't want to pay for it. They don't want to pay for the pilot. And of course, like has been mentioned, there's value in brand names and there's value in, you know, the trust and everything. But for a startup, you know, time is money, and time spent on free pilots takes time away from paying customers. How do you feel? How do you feel on the matter of paying startups for pilots, Gustav?
I think that it's important also to test the willingness to pay for the product. So that should kind of be included in the first pilot together. So that's one thing that differs lean startup way of working from traditional market research. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that you should kind of respect the time from both the corporate and the startups, and time is money also for the corporate. So both parties are investing in the collaboration.
So what would a dream case be for you? Because, you know, startups, we often have to answer these things like, what's your dream investor, or what's your dream corporate partnership? What's your dream startup? Like the hottest startup collaboration you can imagine.
I think that it's impossible to say, because it all depends on the challenge we have. And I think it's very important that the public sector is not just selecting one or two, but that we have parallel dialogues, because you never know what will come up. And that's why it's so important to have a very broad mindset and also, as you said, Tobias, an open innovation approach to the public sector development.
Do you have any bad experiences, Tobias, with some of these partnerships? Have you learned some valuable lessons that we can avoid?
I mean, some of the most valuable lessons are the aspect of time. Because, of course, a startup needs revenue as fast as possible. And the corporate doesn't have the same time or burning platform to actually start the collaboration as fast as possible. Because then you have, from the corporate side, it's more about rather experiment and try and validate if the solution is a good one. And that will take some time, but that's maybe not what the startup wants. The startups, of course, want to full-scale implementation. But from the corporate side, that is maybe not the most preferred way to do it. And there we have the first of the conflicts, how to find a good balance. Yeah.
This is really interesting, because that's a very good point. What actually makes a corporate attractive for a startup or for a scale-up? So you mentioned things like time. What does a corporate need to have in place to be a good partner for a startup if you want to actually scale and innovate?
I do believe that in order to have a corporate that is ready to work with startups, you have to have some kind of a rig that is suitable for the partner and collaboration. You have to see, okay, what kind of internal processes do I have? What kind of strategy do I have when collaborating with startups? And what ways of flexibility regarding business models can I, as a corporate, provide to a startup? And if you don't do that and have a clear thought of how to handle these things, then the possibilities or the outlook for a successful collaboration is quite small, I would say.
I mean, we've seen a lot of these maturity discussions in Norway, a lot on the investment side as well, of how maybe the startups are not mature enough in the way they approach investors, and investors are not mature enough, so they choke the startups instead of, you know, helping to scale. And I think this is a big concern for a lot of startups when it comes to corporates, and they're maybe scared of giving away their ideas. And what is the best way to either kill that myth that is a problem, or to protect the ones who come with the ideas but don't necessarily have the big muscles? Gustav, you were pointed at.
Thank you. To start with, I think that people really should realize, both from a corporate perspective and from a startup perspective, that ideas are not worth very much. So people shouldn't be afraid to discuss ideas. In Silicon Valley, they don't use NDAs anymore, because they have realized that the value in an idea is to kind of discuss and develop the idea together. So that's the number one thing. And people really should look upon this from both perspectives. That if you are a startup, people really should kind of respect the reality that a corporate is kind of living under, and the other way around as well. And the most important thing from both perspectives are perhaps to respect the time from each party.
That I definitely agree, and I hear what you're saying, and I agree with the NDAs. And I've built a couple of companies, and my God, it's taken so long and cost me so much, and it's sweat, blood, and tears, and nobody's going to steal an idea to put that much effort into it. But then there is that, balance of we have seen corporate partnerships where they've started as partnerships, and then the corporate has moved along with the same idea. So there are still a couple of loopholes that we should be careful to. And I think, sure, NDA, that's definitely not the answer for an idea. But are there other things we can do to protect both sides so that it feels safe to enter into a long-term perspective?
One thing is investments. I think that the corporate venture capital is a tool that is it's very good to kind of strengthen the partnership. So if you have invested in the startup, then you kind of respect the startup even more. Then it's a part of your own brand, more or less, and you kind of get the common objective to increase the value of the startup.
That is a very good point. It's if you put your money in it, you kind of want it to grow. So that makes that makes complete sense. But what other business models that you think work best, Petra, in these sort of corporate partnerships?
Well, I think it's very important to clarify the expectations from both parties, because every now and then when we have a challenge and we arrange hackathons or whatever, it's very easy for the startup or the company to sort of believe that we are going to buy the solution or we are going to use your idea. So to be very clear on the expectations, but also the timeline, I think. In the public sector, we have a completely different timeline. There are unfortunately, some bureaucracy, and not all of the bureaucracy is good one. And when we talk to the companies or startups, we're talking weeks, right? So again, coming back to expectations and the different responsibilities in the development or innovation process.
Yeah, I think, and because Tobias mentioned as well time, and I can extremely relate. It's like weeks. That's like a lifetime in my company, and I know Digitaliseringsdirektoratet now has a focus on the collaboration with the public sector towards startups, where time is one of the aspects that they're trying to navigate within. The Start Off. Can you say a little bit about that?
Well, Start Off, it's a new program, or it's a framework where the public sector in Norway is going to be able to work with startups, but with then smoother and shorter procurement processes. And I think it's developed right now, and will go live on early next year. So that will be really interesting to see how that will turn out.
Because it's all about managing these expectations. I mean, what are your expectations to the startups, Tobias, when they enter to your innovation program?
One of the things that I like to see from a startup is that they're coming with a clear thoughts on, okay, how can Sopra Steria Scale Up assist the startup in order to get entrance to a client, or how to work together. And again, I think time is one thing, but also timing. Because we're talking a lot about good solutions out there, but from the corporate side, I mean, it's all about timing. I mean, you can have the best solution in the world, but if you just set aside or a new project in-house that is basically the same that this solution can provide, then it's quite easy to say that it's a long shot to get it done. But for me, and again, talking about building a timeline and timing when it's good to approach, and also has a clear value proposition on how the startup can add value. I think that's one of the most important things.
Do you have some examples of some of your favorite partnerships and examples of how this has been very successful both for you and for the startup?
I mean, one of the real interesting examples is that some of the startups we work with, or the startups we work with, are mature. They are having solutions already out there. They're having clients. They're having a clear model of revenue. But when they come to us, some of them has already started with POCs or pilots at some of the clients. And then they say, okay, if we're going to scale this solution at the large corporation, then we need someone who can actually make sure that this can go from a pilot to a large project, and think about how to scale it into the organization. And when a startup coming to us with that in mind and knows, okay, this is what we have, this is what we need, then it's much easier for me to see, okay, how could we actually build this together, or how can we complement each other to make it less risky for the large corporation to actually say yes to try a startup solution.
So most important, it's sort of a readiness assessment that you do, and of course they need to know why they're coming to you.
Yeah.
You want them to do their research on you before they come.
At least I want to do the research about what their solution can can add, and as Gustav said, what problems are you solving? Because then it makes my work to see, okay, how could this solution fit one of our clients much easier.
Petra, you mentioned bureaucracy. How is it? Ooh. How is it working with innovation within, a place known for bureaucracy?
Well, I think we should work for eliminating most bureaucracy. Yes.
I'm with you all the way.
I used to call it the bureaucracy, the bogeyman of bureaucracy, because we need flat armies. We don't need too much hierarchies. And I think this digital shock we have been through actually asked or drive more innovation through flat armies. I don't know. I think we must be more explorative as well in the public sector in order to lower bureaucracy and be more inclusive and create good arenas for companies. So, we need to cut out all the non-important bureaucracy and all the reporting.
Down with the bureaucracy.
Absolutely.
I agree. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
But we're in a very special time, of course, and we're all talking about how COVID-19 kind of pushed us into the future. Has that changed maybe some of the time frames to enter new corporate or new innovation projects? It doesn't necessarily even have to be corporate partnerships, but how has that changed, maybe especially in the public sector, being forced into living much more digital? How has that changed the options and possibilities for innovation and partnerships?
I think it made things more smooth, because the digital shock or the changes we have done through working through other tools like Huddlies and the Teams and everything made the connections and the cooperation much easier. So that will for sure drive innovation as well, because it's easier to meet people and to work together. And also I think it's been affecting the leadership role, that we don't need just bosses or leaders, but we need co-workers in a completely different way. And this digital change also sort of pushed for a new kind of leadership, which is improving the way we work with innovation.
Yeah. I think I run a company delivering platform as a service, and I've been preaching future of work for years, and people have been looking like, wow, yeah, that's interesting. I can't wait to see 10 years from now if you're right. And then suddenly we're living in the future of work, and now they're all having platforms. So, something happens with the mentality when you live in a situation. Okay, so we've discussed a lot about what you are expecting from startups when they come, and then the next step. You've found a startup or a scale-up that you want to move forward with the relationship. How does that work? Like, how is that actual collaboration? It's more than signing some pieces of paper and delivering a product, I guess, Tobias.
Yeah, that's right. And from the scale-up, Sopra Steria Scale-up's perspective, our job is to get or provide proximity to the clients or the ecosystem for the clients. So basically means that innovation is all about connecting dots, we often say. But in this case, you have the startup and you have the client problem. And what's put in here is like the innovation governance, the process to actually get something done. Because we can talk so much about innovation, we can talk so much about bureaucracy and experimenting, but if you don't have kind of a good process or governance on how to run it, then it's getting risky. So what we do is to do this. Our job is to being the bridge between the startup and the client, and where we provide this innovation process, which basically means that we can lower the risk for the corporate to actually try, experiment, and validate. And it also gets lower risk for the startup because we going into there and we are basically helping them to do this process. In the end, you can. In the end, both for the startup and the corporate, you're having a pilot or POC that is ready to validate.
So you're basically just facilitating as well, like how interpreting from one side to the next. How long is like an ideal partnership? Is it for a project that you prefer, or are you more like this is for life? Let's get married.
Let's get married. No, but nevertheless, I mean, what we do, we're having a process that we can run this from ID or to pilot in 12 weeks. And what is quite interesting here, that if we find a use case that fits to Gustav in Storebrand, then Sopra Steria has insurance clients in other countries, which means that we can take this use case and introduce it to other countries, which means that, again, those startups that is interesting for us to collaborate with them are those who has these solutions that are ready for scale and that we can bring to clients.
It's just a meta corporate partnership with you, and then over to Gustav, and then over to public sector, and it's one big happy family. But what is it like? Why is it attractive for a startup to collaborate with you? Like, what is the best thing that you as a startup bring to the table, Gustav? You as a corporate.
What we can bring to the table is brand, especially within finance, because it's we're talking about your money and your insurance, so it's really important things for people.
Yeah, I feel my money is important to me. It is.
Exactly. So then you need a kind of a trusted brand. It doesn't have to be the brand that's kind of facing the customer, but if you can kind of co-brand with Storebrand, it's kind of giving trust to people, and I think that's really important. The number 2 argument is that we have a lot of customers. I think we have a lot, around 1.3 million customers around in Norway, which is quite a lot, so we can reach out and test quite easy on our customers. Number 3 is that we have a good rig handling partnerships. We have learned a lot during our 5 years collaborating with startups. And last but not least, we also have this corporate venture capital that we have some capital that to invest and strengthen the partnerships.
Some skin in the game. So that was
Exactly.
your top 4. How about you, Petra? What's your what's the best parts about collaborating with the public sector for a startup?
I think it's the possibility for them to join us to find solutions for huge challenges. And we also think that creating this ecosystem from our point of view is very important, so they could sort of work together with us in finding solutions. So they were able to join us and find good solutions. And also, of course, when we develop tools and methods, we can also share this, and we can improve our methods and tools by working with companies and startups. So I think it's a win-win situation by doing this together.
Saving the world and solving the big problems. That is a big motivation.
Easy peasy.
Easy peasy. Tobias, what are your biggest selling points?
One of the biggest selling points is actually that we don't invest in the startups.
Ooh, okay, this is interesting. Yes.
Yes, and that means that instead of the startups that I meet are coming in with dollar signs on their eyes, they are more now focused, okay, how can we present our business or our use case or the problem we're solving that could help our clients. So, and I also do believe that this way of doing it also makes the startup to think, okay, how can we find a good collaboration, both like in terms of business model, but also in terms of, again, what kind of, how can we complement each other to work together to enter or to one of the large clients we have.
So it's basically like access to a larger audience then.
Yeah, the client
is your-
proximity is what we in Scale Up can offer for the companies that have the good solutions. And then again, as I said, those clients we work with are the ones who know us for years, which means that we know their inside procedures, they know how we run projects, and what we do here is basically just taking a startup to deliver the technology, and we do everything else as the same. So I think, that is one of the ways that has been giving us a bit edge, and also makes startups coming to us because they do know that they won't lose any equities.
I like that it's different replies to all of you. Gustav, you wanted to comment?
Just to clarify what I said about corporate venture capital. In Storebrand, we kind of invest our customers' money, pension money, for example. So that's kind of one bucket. So that's not the bucket that I'm talking about here. Corporate venture capital for us means that we are not a venture capitalist, so we don't invest in companies that we don't cooperate with. So first we start a partnership, and if the partnership turns out to be good, then we kind of invest to strengthen the partnership. And we don't kind of go out in the media and say that we have this amount of money to specify it.
How much money do you have?
Exactly. So it's more like in the long run to strengthen the partnership. And so it's not for the financial return, it's more to strengthen the partnership return.
But I think it's really interesting the fact that you are so different, because it strengthens what you were saying, Tobias, about actually being aware of who you approach in order to get a corporate partnership. You can't just a corporate partnership is not just a corporate partnership. It's very different if it's with public sector or Storebrand or Sopra Steria. So it's important to know exactly who you are, where you're going, and then you can approach your next big partner.
Yeah, because I think it's a good distinction to do, because in Gustav at Storebrand and Petra at public sector, they're looking for solutions, of course, that could add value to them directly. But Sopra Steria, as a consultancy business, our job is to help our clients to get better. So that's why it's interesting to find these solutions that could add value to our clients. Yeah. So it's more to see how can we help the startups to get to the real solve the real challenges, than that we are using them for ourselves.
And it's interesting because we discuss quite often, we say, the big with the small, like why should the big companies partner with the small? But it doesn't really matter if it's big and small, it's a win-win situation. So you can't enter a partnership without it being some sort of equality in terms of somebody's giving something and we're both giving something to get something at the end, right? But you've done this a few times now. Give us some do's and don'ts. Give us some horror stories.
Some horror stories. I think one of the best things to stress is that it's about collaboration and not corporation. And the distinction there is that when you're working with corporation, you work with someone to make yourself better. But when you work with a collaborative mindset, it's about how can you collaborate together to find a solution that is win-win for both. And I think that is one of the most important things here. And if you don't have that mindset when you enter into a partnership, then I think it's quite good recipe for a long-term relationship.
Yeah. Petra, do you have some do's and don'ts?
Well, I think the don'ts is that we need to create, we should not create a bad culture when it comes to approaching companies and startups. And for a lot of people in the public sector, it's still a bit dangerous to even talk to a startup or a company. And I used to say that we can take a meeting, we can have a chat over the phone, come over, talk to us. And we're still not in a procurement process, because a lot of colleagues think that you're not allowed even to talk to a company, because it will be very sensitive once we have a procurement. So be open and be invitive, and create arenas for all the companies and startups to join. That's something we absolutely have to do, and we should get rid of the bad not inviting culture. And of course it's about trust as well, right? So yeah.
I think this is a very good point, and we spoke briefly about it, about the whole trust, and I think it's a lot because we maybe don't discuss enough publicly about these partnerships and what does it entail and what does each party want of each other and the expectations, and the more we can actually talk about it, the better these partnerships can go. What are your do's and don'ts?
From a startup perspective, what they should think of
Yeah.
when contacting the
For
corporate.
instance.
Okay. I remember when I was looking for my first summer job back in the year 2000, when the internet started.
Yes.
I remember I sent my application through Hotmail to 100 receivers, and no one answered.
Oh.
And the reason, I think, was that it was kind of written quite general. That, "Hi, my name is Gustav. I would like a summer job at your amazing company." And the point is that people can see what you are kind of writing directly, if it's kind of personal or not, if you're really interested in working at that company or not. And I think the same lesson could be learned from a startup, because I said earlier that we get in contact with the startups. It's not that much the other way around, but that's not the whole truth, because people contact me a lot through LinkedIn and through email, but I don't even kind of recognize that as a contact, because it's so extremely unprofessional written. So in general, that you can see that the text is copied from another place to another with a link, etc. So I just kind of delete those emails, to be honest, because I get kind of pissed off.
That makes complete sense. I mean, probably the only thing worse would be if somebody's used their Hotmail account from year 2000 with Kim 1980 bunny at hotmail.com. That would probably be the only worst thing. Yeah, that's quite good. How about tips for other corporates who would like to start? I mean, you all have long experience with this, but I'm guessing that you recommend these partnerships to other corporates. What would be like the number one advice you would like to give them?
We're talking a lot about the startups getting ready for work with the big ones, but it's not so much focus on the big ones getting ready to work with the small ones. Because as I said, if you don't have the internal rig and you have thought about what you want, is it strategic or is it like fun to do it? And thinking about the processes, then again, it's a bigger risk to fail in terms of collaboration. And I think startup or the corporate's readiness to work with startups is extremely important. And I do believe that it's one of the biggest learnings when I've been working with scale up and in the bridge between the corporate world and the startup world, that so many corporates want to collaborate, but they don't have the rig. So that's why we invented a tool called Startup Readiness Assessment, where we actually go into the to the corporate and doing an assessment to see what kind of rig do they have and what kind of improvements can be done in order to be even smoother or better to collaborate.
I like that. Have you taken that assessment?
Yes, absolutely. I know that I'm a mentor at the factory, and I know they are doing analysis or a project where they look into how corporates and startups are working together and how that's creating added value. So that would be really interesting to see how that will turn out. So you have to follow up on that. But I completely agree with Tobias that we need to have an architecture or internal infrastructure who could really receive and meet and discuss with the startups. And in most public organizations, there are just one or two persons perhaps who understands why we should cooperate. But again, as I said, things have been improving quite a lot the past years. So now we have, in most municipalities, you have a team, or you have at least a couple of people who could work together and create partnership innovation. But we have to make sure that it's a solid infrastructure, not just only rigged for the project. It must be long-term in order to sustain a good dialogue and partnership innovation.
That makes complete sense. These are really good advices. Are there any last words you would like to add to this discussion?
If I could make a couple of advice, I would say that confess to yourself that Norway and Sweden are two small markets for digital development. You don't have enough inhabitants to kind of cost-effectively invest in digital solutions for every aspect. So number one is to confess that, and that's also confession that you need some partnership because you can't develop everything by yourself. And you should look at not only company synergies that most of the companies do, but also look at customer synergies between services. And you should devote time, because people or corporates don't devote enough time to the partnerships. They think that, oh, fine, it's more regarded more or less like outsourcing, which is not. And last but not least, you should develop a common OKRs, objective key results, together with a partner. And that's a very good way to kind of set the expectations on a normal level, so you don't fall into the trap that the startup contact you and say, oh, we would like to develop this too next week. That's more or less impossible in a big corporation. But if you kind of develop OKRs together, set goals for each quarter or half year, full year, etc., then you kind of get a little bit more bureaucracy into the startup, which is quite good actually.
Exactly. So the best of both worlds. Tobias?
Yeah, just to reflect what Gustav is saying. In Scale Up, we have a tagline called Think Big, Start Small, and Scale Up. And I think that goes for both the startup and how they should run the company, but it also goes for the corporates in order to experiment and try to work together with startups. To start small, experiment, and see what works, and use that to scale up and solve some real problems.
That's a perfect way to end it. So think big, start small, then scale.
Up.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.